Editorial page editor, Josh Brodesky.
All right, thanks y'all for joining us for another editorial board meeting. We've had a lot of success with these, and I'm really thrilled to say that this meeting is incredibly timely and top of mind for a lot of parents, teachers, grandparents, everyone in the community is thinking about school, and we are super fortunate to have three of our area superintendents to join us today, take time from their busy schedules. So I'm just going to go around the Zoom room real quick and do introductions, and we will hop to it. We have from San Antonio Independent School District, Pedro Martinez. We have Eduardo Hernandez from Edgewood ISD and Brian Woods from Northside ISD. So thanks to all three of you for being here with us. And then from the editorial board side, we have Mark Medici, the publisher, Carrie Clack, editorial board member, editorial writer and columnist. And then we have Gloria Padilla, who's also an editorial writer and columnist. And then separate from the editorial board, we have two of our outstanding education reporters, Krista Tarova and Alia Malik. They are not on the editorial board. They're strictly objective news reporters, but they're here to ask questions. They may write news stories from this. So that's how our board operates. So my intro question for the three of you, it was going to be super basic. It was going to be paint a picture for parents and educators about what school would look like as we resume in terms of this digital learning format. But obviously, TEA and Attorney General Ken Paxton has somewhat complicated that. So sort of a two-part question. One, still paint that picture for parents in particular and teachers, but also, what are your reactions to the news that we've seen from the state in terms of withholding funding, and the questions around whether public health authorities can limit in-person instruction. So I'm just going to start with Pedro Martinez from SAISD, since you're top left, and we'll just work our way around the screen. So I'll put myself on mute now.
Thank you, Josh. And so for us, I'm hoping our plans won't change, but our plans right now are to start remote for the first 3 weeks of the school year. And we actually changed our calendar so that we could start in-person instruction as early as after Labor Day. And our logic was that we're hoping that cases will start reducing or plateauing in our community. As you know, right now cases have been going up and down, but for the most part, they've been going still in an upward trend. And so that's very concerning for us. So that's why we decided to go remote. What I'd like to do is after the Labor Day, we would like to bring in students that we see are struggling. So what I've asked our team, I'm very proud of the work our teachers are doing, but we know that many of our students, especially students in our district with 90% poverty, that they just struggle remote. And we saw that during the spring break. And so we've learned a lot since that period. And even though we've gotten very favorable comments from our parents and teachers, we feel that, again, we want to make sure that those children are served well. So we will be hopefully transitioning or phasing in some of those children in person after Labor Day up to 25%. Our goal was, if cases decline, working with Metro Health, and when I mean declining over an extended period, over 2 weeks, positivity rates going down, I wanted to then honor the declarations of our parents. We're asking parents right now as we speak to let us know whether they're going to come in person, they want to come in person or stay remote for the first and second grading period. And so our goal was that to go up to 50% sometime as we go into the 8th, 9th, or even later, depending if cases were going down. What's complicated this today now is that we still have flexibility for the first 8 weeks, but starting in the 9th week, I have no choice but to allow every child who wants to come in person. I have no choice but to serve those children. And so the challenge, of course, is I wanted to work with Metro Health and say, let's create some criteria so that I can show families that it's getting safer. Let's honor your declaration, but at least for the first 3 weeks, and even the first 8 weeks, let's be very cautious until we see those cases going down, and so that we can prioritize the children that we know are struggling. So Josh, that's the complication now, is that right now, after 8 weeks, I have no choice but to allow every child to come in person.
And then let's hear from Dr. Hernandez, and then Dr. Woods. You can round out the answers to that question.
So in an effort to continue to round that out, I'm going to echo pretty much the same that Pedro mentioned, but I think the other part for us is we want to make sure that we also are able to stand up a high quality teacher or educator on the other side of that. So for us, the first 8 weeks or that transition period is also going to be about helping teachers become as highly qualified in terms of being able to deliver that instruction. Our particular school board here made the decision to purchase a one-to-one device for every student. For us, our challenges now become the connectivity, or how do we connect to students in every household. So those are other things that I would say to our parents are the reality of where we are over in Edgewood. I know we share a lot of similarities with San Antonio ISD. And then the third thing that I think that schools are going to look like, we are also ready to prepare and address the social emotional needs of our kids. Our kids have been gone since spring break. There is a lot that is going on in the neighborhoods here in Edgewood in terms of all the economic factors, family issues that have come up because students are at home. We are ready to support them through our social workers, through our counselors, through our social emotional learning counselors. Those are a little different than the counseling some of our other folks provide for our folks. But that is something else that we are preparing as we transition students back. I agree that after 9 weeks, we will, based on what I know today, we will have to have our students back on campuses through one of our commitment, through one of our three options. We're offering three options. We're offering face-to-face as part of our commitment, or remote, or a hybrid model. And so we would still be looking to do that after the second transition period, which is week 9. For us, that would be October the 12th, which is our 9th week of school. And so that's, for us, that's what our picture looks like in Edgewood. All the academic needs, but addressing the social emotional needs, which are a challenge because a child can't be ready to learn if we haven't addressed some of these other issues as well.
Yeah, so for us, very similar comments. Our hope was to start the year all virtual, which we have already announced, and actually announced that prior to the Metro Health Order, and trying to line up, as these gentlemen have explained, our plan for all virtual to line up with the Metro Health Order, so that after Labor Day we might consider using metrics, right, and listening to the doctors, whether or not it was appropriate at that time to start bringing in groups of students into the building, and then to very slowly test our protocols, ramp up the numbers of students we have in the building, focus on academically at-risk groups of students, as you heard already this morning. And so very similar plans. To address specifically what happened yesterday with regard to the AG's letter and then the TEA interpretation. So the AG issued a letter, not a formal opinion, but a letter. And most of the attorneys that I've visited with do not believe it carries the weight of law. But that doesn't matter, because the agency has determined that it does carry the weight of law, and flip-flopped their guidance, literally a 180-degree turn. Before yesterday at 3 o'clock, when you read the 30-some-odd page guidance letter put out by the agency, the answer to the question, will schools be funded if they are closed by a local health authority, the first word in the answer was yes. Then yesterday at 3 o'clock, that got changed to no. And so what we're contemplating, and what these gentlemen have indicated well, is that starting in the 9th week of our respective school years, regardless of the status of the virus in our community, as the guidance is written today, we would be faced with two options. One would be to ignore a local health order, and in doing so, very likely put our students and our staff and families at risk, or lose funding, which is essential to teaching and serving our families. Ed said in a very clear way, we serve families in lots of ways, right? Well beyond teaching and learning. There are lots of services that we need to provide to families to help them be successful, and to lose that funding would render that virtually impossible to do.
Just one question, and I will stop asking questions so the rest of the group can dive in. But, you know, both Dr. Woods and Dr. Martinez, you both referred to using SA Metro Health metrics to guide how you sort of bring students back onto campus. Does anything from the state change? You know, and one thing that Dr. Martinez and I, we talked about this a few days ago. It would be great if we had something almost parallel to Edward's aquifer protection, right? It's stage 1, it's stage 2, and it's stage 3. Something really simple for the community to kind of follow and rally around in some ways. My question really is, does what what we've seen from the state, does that change the possibility of using those metrics, even in like an informal way to guide school board decisions in terms of in terms of kids on campus? Because the way I read it is Metro Health can't order it, but you all can make decisions up until the 9th week, I guess, right?
Yeah. So Josh, we have flexibility for the first 8 weeks. The second 4 weeks have to be by board approval, but my board is completely aligned. I mean, our goal is around safety, and so we develop a system that, again, our goal was to work with Metro Health to say, in each phase, we have them in levels. Level 1 is 100% remote. Level 2, it's us slowly bringing in children that are struggling, because as Eduardo said, our children have so many needs. And many of my children really do struggle because they don't have the right living conditions. So providing them social and emotional support, academic supports. I have a lot of special needs children that need a lot of services. So we wanted to phase those children in up to 25%. And I feel confident that we can safely do that. Now, the state requires that any family who chooses to come in person, that we have to bring them in starting in the 9th week. Our goal was, okay, let's look at health metrics. And what I've seen in Florida, I've seen in Ohio, I've seen across many states is some common things. So for example, a decline in cases that is in a downward trend. It could be over 2 weeks or longer, a decline in positivity testing rates. Right now, our positivity testing is well over 10%. It's upwards of 15%. And so getting that down to closer to 5%. That's when I was hoping that we could go to level 3, which would be bringing in our children up to 50%. And today, that I can honor all of the parents who want to come in person at that level, but we can do it safely, and we can see that cases are going down. Our biggest concern is that what we don't want is to bring in a whole bunch of children. We have to close down the schools. We have outbreaks. I'm going to lose trust of our families if we do that, and of course, my children will suffer academically and socially and emotionally. And so again, that was the goal. I think, Dr. Woods, Eduardo, many of our colleagues, we were all aligned. I mean, we're all going to use slightly different systems, but similar thinking, because I think we know how to do this. And I think the frustration, and Dr. Woods probably expressed it the best, is that now that's being compromised. So now we're right back to, okay, well, let's, in the 9th week, what's going to happen? So what if 80% of my families want to come in person and cases are still extremely high? How do I achieve safety for children? And so that's just, that's an impossible place to put a superintendent and board who really do want to do the right things for children, both in terms of safety and academics.
Yeah, well said. I think Pedro's exactly right. We have all agreed that we want to use local metrics in concert with doctors to make these decisions and adjust as conditions adjust, and not be wed to a state dictated timeline, but rather adjust based on those metrics.
Hey guys, I've got a very quick question. Each of you used the term academically at risk. Would each of you kind of talk about the percentage of your student population that is academically at risk?
So go ahead, Eduardo.
Okay, so for Edgewood, 97% of my kids are academically at risk. Most of the students in my district are challenged with, obviously, not just the academic needs, but also just their basic living needs. Outside of the building where I'm sitting right now, I've got a line of cars that are ready for our food drive. We have a food drive every Thursday that's sponsored by our school district. We have about a 2-hour wait of cars just to make sure that we can load up their supplies for the next week. This is separate from what we're supplying for our children. This is just for families. A lot of the families that I have an opportunity to serve are older grandparents who are also taking care of grandkids because the parents aren't present. So academically challenged for me is more than just the academics. It is just basic needs. It is also the social emotional needs of the children. And quite frankly, it is also the social emotional needs of the family. It is a unit. It's the living conditions that are a challenge for districts like mine before I even get to the academic pieces. And so those are realities that we face beyond just the data that we're provided. That we have different levels of poverty in our district too. Although it may be easy to say, well, everybody's poor in Edgewood. Well, there are levels of poverty in Edgewood too. And so we try to break those down into quadrants so that we can provide social services that are germane to the specific area of Edgewood too. Our southern section sometimes isn't as high needs as the northern part of Edgewood. And so we really try to go very detail oriented in our approach, but that is what on the academic sense, what we're challenged here with in Edgewood.
And Mark, in our district, similar to Eduardo, just the density of poverty is very deep, and we're seeing homeless numbers rising up significantly. We have a program called Handle with Care with San Antonio Police, where our counselors and social workers get notified whenever a child has been exposed to any significant trauma. Those calls are off the roof. I mean, those numbers continue to rise significantly. So we're seeing children. Based on the state's metrics, we have 90% poverty. Over 70% of our children are at risk based on their metrics. That's attendance, grades, test scores, many things like that. But as Eduardo said, when we go deeper, for example, just this week, there was a family that came to my attention that has multiple children. The father died of COVID. So now it's a single mom. They basically have no income. They're at risk of being homeless, and it's a significant number of children. The mom is afraid, right? She doesn't know what to do. So we're about to send this week, sending staff, their social workers. We're giving her food. We're sending food to her. But as Eduardo said, when you look at that story that came out with the food bank and all those cars waiting, well, that was every day in my district. I had 30 sites that were pickup sites, and we had over almost 80 delivery sites with our buses. And so we were doing that all spring. We've been doing that in the summer. And again, those basic needs are only going to grow because we know that the economic ramifications of COVID are just starting to hit us, and they haven't stopped yet.
Yeah, I would answer it in a slightly different way, only because we're socioeconomically a lot more diverse district, but still have pockets of huge need, incredible need. And I would echo what both of those gentlemen said around the notion of food insecurity. I think one of the things that has struck me the most since March the 11th has been the incredible need to prevent food insecurity, and all of our efforts that you just heard these gentlemen describe in the last 4.5 months to prevent that from happening. I would just say to anybody watching today that the food bank's work has been incredible. And if anybody has a spare dollar, please give it there, because that organization not only spends your money well, but the need is absolutely incredible. I think, Mark, just to put a point on it, when we talk about bringing small groups of students into our schools, and we say this kind of general term, academically at risk or struggling, we think about perhaps slightly different groups, but largely common groups. Special needs students. We've got some students who are in self-contained special needs units who it is very difficult to serve in a fully remote setting, a fully virtual setting. And so we know we need to bring some of those students into our buildings. English language learners, there's just we could go on and on and on listing groups, but we know we need to prioritize some students by need, because some of the academic need is significant.
Mark, I would also throw one other group that I think is really important. Our Spanish-speaking community, that is also another challenge. We have a lot of folks in Edgewood that are your folks that are not documented, that typically will have a strain on going to the school to begin with. And so there's also that academic, the language factor that is a challenge for us, because, I happen to be able to speak both languages and I try to communicate as much as I can, but I can't be everywhere. But there are folks who would rather sit in fear of coming and asking. For those of us who have really just staked our whole lives on this work. I mean, I do this work because it's part of my purpose. But they are sitting out there suffering too. And those are other things that directly affect living conditions, food insecurity, which ultimately end up in our classrooms. And that's before, again, we even begin the educating of the child.
I just want to say to all three of you how grateful I am to have you with us today. I thought all of those, all of those answers were incredibly heartfelt. I could spend 10 hours with you guys, but we have a lot of smart people on this call, and I want to give them the opportunity to ask some other questions as well. I have one more question, but I'm going to save it towards the end. I just want to say thank you for your being so candid.
I have a question regarding students who are scared to go back into the classroom and teachers who are scared to go back into the classroom. The teachers are under contract. Their window for backing out of those yearly contracts long past, right before the state policy was announced, and now it's shifting again. How do you deal with that? If students don't report to class after you mandate them to show up in the middle of a pandemic, how do you deal with that in terms of truancy, keeping them able to access their education, and also how do you deal with the teachers who want to back out of their contracts at this late game?
So, Gloria, in our district, we're not seeing those issues in terms of our teachers wanting to back out of contracts. The good news is, and this was, something that Dr. Woods and Dr. Hernandez and I fought for, we made sure we had flexibility with the state around keeping children remote as long as they chose that. And that was a win. So any child who wants to stay learning remote can do that. Now, the other challenge, though, that I hear sort of in your question is, even when children are learning remote, like I said, we saw children that started logging on with us and then became disengaged. Younger children who just didn't want to be on the computer, right, for extended amount of times. And so that's the reason why I want the flexibility to be able to bring in up to a quarter of our children after Labor Day, because we see those students struggling and they don't have good living conditions. They might have parents that, by the way, are the frontline workers. They're the parents that are stocking the shelves at HEB. They're the parents that are that are at the register. When you go to the restaurants and pick up food, and those of us who have that privilege, well, guess who's cooking that food and serving that food to you? Those are our parents, and now are even our students. And so we just want to make sure we can prioritize those students that we know are going to struggle from the beginning. In terms of our teachers, we've been taking surveys. About a third of our teachers are very scared and very anxious. So we are going to set up a process, and we're aligning this with my colleagues across the county and across the state, so that any teacher who's health compromised, they'll be able to get an approval to work an extended amount of time from home. We are asking our teachers over time to work from our school buildings. And that's mainly, Gloria, because I have to be prepared to serve the children in person, especially depending on what happens with the state orders, after starting in the 9th week. And it's not gonna, and I'm phasing the teachers in because we got to train them on our safety procedures. Our strategy is that starting in the first day of school on a voluntary basis, we'll have a group of teachers that already have reached out to us that want to be part of it, that will work from our buildings. They'll learn our safety procedures. They'll give us feedback on those procedures, on our PPE equipment, because I don't want, if our teachers are calm, then when students come in, whenever they come in after Labor Day, then they'll be calm. But if my teachers are nervous and scared, they're not going to be able to teach. If my children are scared and nervous, they're not going to be able to learn. And so that's the strategy. It's not going to be perfect. It's going to be, it's going to be messy as everything is. And of course, as my colleagues have said, now with this AG, opinion and how TA is adopting it, unfortunately, the concern I have is, again, it could reduce my flexibility. But again, I feel confident that if we're allowed to bring in children gradually, if I'm able to phase in the teachers, that I can meet all the different needs, and we can educate these children and provide all the essential services they need. And that's what we keep asking for, is we need that flexibility. We know what to do. We can manage this, but we need that flexibility. It cannot, we can't get caught in the politics.
So I'll add to what Pedro just mentioned. I think yes to everything you just mentioned. The communication piece has been really key for us, and I'm sure that it's the same for both gentlemen in the districts. We meet with our folks every Thursday through virtual town halls. We've had a lot of presentations on behalf of myself and my executive team to our school board, but also to our parents through virtual town halls, both in English and Spanish, making sure that our board members also have the information they need so they can get out in the community when they speak to constituents and say, here are the plans, here are the guiding principles we're using to really stand up our response to the virus. Here are 7 protocols that we follow in terms of safety and security for every campus. You will see these 7 components present in every campus. Things like, where do we drop off specific doors, what our cleaning procedures are, using lots of visuals, because people, we learn through visuals, and really communicating that often, early and often. I repeat that a lot, early and often we communicate, and just making sure that we make this work, although very difficult and very unprecedented, about back to our purpose. So why do we come here? Why do we choose every day to serve in our districts? Because there are children, if it's difficult for us, there are children who are living in conditions that really require us to stand above ourselves, service above self. And so really just taking us back to that and making sure we build that muscle memory repetition of here's our procedures. Like Pedro, we're taking a phase-in approach. I have a lot for every teacher that says, I'm afraid. I acknowledge that because the humanity piece is very important here. But I also have teachers that say, hey, I'm ready. In fact, just tell me I'm ready to come back. And so we've stood up a process. Teachers can start, for teachers to start coming in, because I also believe there's that peer-to-peer conversation where I won't get to be in as a superintendent. But a teacher A and teacher B will say, hey, it's not as scary as you think it is. Why don't you try it out? And so now what we do is we start building a coalition of folks that say, yes, we acknowledge we're afraid, but we also know that we took on, we said we would be charged with educating children. And so we're going to follow all the procedures with regards to leave when people feel like they need to have leave. We're also looking at the possibility of employee assistance programs for those folks who say, I want to come, but I have children. Well, how can we support you in that regards? And so we haven't had a lot of issues with folks saying, well, I'm just going to get up and go. We haven't had that issue. And so I think communication is key. And the humanity piece, I get there's a lot of unprecedented changes. I'm human too as a superintendent. I admit it, it's frustrating. But we're not going to lose that part through this whole process. So that would be my add-on to this piece.
Gloria, I wouldn't, the question I think has been well answered with regard to how we see those things. In Northside, we see them very similar to what you just heard. What I would reiterate though is the politicization of this issue has made what was already a fairly challenging circumstance quite a bit more challenging. And so the ask of the people on the Ed board and of the reporters that we have a lot of respect for, and for anybody watching this, is to try to help us avoid it becoming any more political than it already is. I think we feel like we hear from both extremes and very little from the folks that are perhaps more reasonable and in the middle. The issue about opening school really comes down to balancing two forces: the safety of students and staff and families, and the need to educate our children. Those are the two items, period. We don't have room in that calculus for politics. And that makes choosing wisely between those two competing forces that much more challenging.
And Gloria, I just got to emphasize what Dr. Woods just said. We hear both sides, and both sides might have, they might be correct in certain things, but they're also wrong in certain things. And the reality and my fear, and this is, me being new to Texas and San Antonio, in my 6th year, when I look at what's happening, when there's people fighting for keep the schools closed, keep everybody remote, keep everybody working from home. Well, here's the thing. Many of our children, that is not a viable option. For many of our parents, that is not a viable option. Our children will struggle and they will lose academically. And this will affect their entire lives going forward. And so that is just a reality. And I'm very concerned about that. At the same time, we can't just open up all the schools and just have everybody come in. Again, we're asking, at that point, then we're just gonna, it's what happened in San Antonio and Texas, right? We opened up too early, safety procedures weren't followed enough, and guess what? Our cases spiked up significantly. And so, again, we have to be able to balance these two things, as Dr. Wood said, and the majority of the public, I think, is in the middle and is with us. And that's why I said, we know what to do. We just need the flexibility to do it and to work with the health professionals so that we have good criteria as we're allowing children to come in. And it can be accomplished. But if we get caught on either side, guess what? It's just a distraction. And at the end of the day, what happens in this community? Always, the people of privilege, they're the ones that are speaking out, and it's our children that don't have that voice. They're the ones that always lose out 100% of the time. And so again, I just ask, let's not get caught into either side. Let's just continue to work together to figure out how do we do this safely. And again, let's continue to fight for more flexibility, which I know all my colleagues, we're going to continue to fight that, because we're not going to stop and just say, well, we don't have a choice. No, we will continue to advocate, but we will advocate with these two goals that Dr. Woods just explained.
So in some school districts, during these first few weeks of virtual learning, all virtual learning for the students. In some school districts, teachers will be teaching virtually from their empty classrooms unless they have like a health exemption. And in others, like in SAISD, a smaller percentage of teachers are doing that voluntarily. What are Edgewood teachers doing with regards to that? Are they mostly teaching from home, or where does Edgewood fall?
So at this point, we have teachers that have already expressed an interest in writing to me, because I asked them for their feedback beyond the surveys. We did a lot of surveying with our parents, a lot of surveying with our families on what they would like to see in terms of it's not just about coming into the buildings, but also how do we support you to be a high quality remote teacher? What we're hearing from them is one, help us develop that skill set, allow us to have some flexibility in how we approach back into the campuses. And we have, as I mentioned before, we already have a considerable group of folks that are asking, saying, I'm ready to come back like right now. When can I come back? And so obviously my holding that up has been because I want to make sure I have as much information as a superintendent, because obviously our teachers are hearing, it's almost like whiplash. One of my colleagues said, this feels like whiplash. One day we hear one thing, one day we hear another. And so I want to make sure that I have the most up-to-date information, but we are ready to let them in, the ones that are ready to come. We also have those who say, I'm ready to come, Dr. H, but what do I do with my children? And so we look at employee support programs and how do we support our teachers who are ready to come work remotely from their classroom so that they can serve the need of our kids. Because again, we go back to the reality of the community we serve requires us to step above ourselves sometimes and really make sure that we're offering opportunities for our kids who need to get out of home sometimes. And then of course we have our other folks who say, I'm afraid. And so right now we're still in that transition period where remote is an option. But again, I'm planning on phasing folks back in so that I can also dispel the rumor that we're not ready, or that they were not safety and health ready. But of course, we're having a lot of virtual meetings. We're providing lots of information demonstrations as well. We just had them last night at our board meeting to our board to reassure teachers as much as we can. Trust us. Let's work on this. And full disclosure, come also because I would consider you part of our safety committee. As with anything, there are going to be things that we can enhance and make better. So you coming in helps the total effort, because I may have a blind spot that you're going to be able to help me through. And so that's part of our response with regards to teachers working in our classrooms and really being able to support students at home.
And Alia, just to clarify, in our district, we're phasing teachers in, but we're gonna, even teachers who are working remote, we're asking a lot of them. And so one of the things that we're asking teachers, look, and many of our teachers already told us and said, I can do this work better from the school. And it will be the teacher by themselves in the classroom. Why? Because we'll have reliable internet. Our dark fiber is getting finished. And so every one of our schools will have pretty much unlimited internet access. They'll have reliable devices. And we're actually gonna take a note from what Northeast is doing, and we're gonna allow teachers to bring in their children into our buildings. And we will have each school develop a plan of how we provide oversight for these children. It won't be official childcare, but it'll be children that'll be allowed, so that if they're, whatever district they're enrolled in, if they're, so they can have access to the remote learning plan. And again, if they need a device, we'll have devices there, we'll have reliable internet. And so again, we're trying to help even our teachers balance the challenges, because one of the things that we know is that the requirements academically are going to be much higher. And I will just say this, I am a supporter of that. We need to be able to balance the academic needs of our children as well as safety. And so children will just be, our students and parents, they'll know our requirements, but they're going to be much more rigorous. And it's really requirements that the state has. But like I said, I'm a supporter of them, because at some point, ladies and gentlemen, this virus is going to be behind us. And I'm an optimist. There is a race to the vaccine. It's going to happen. We cannot right now allow this virus to just freeze everything. And again, because the people that are going to get hurt are children that have the most needs. And at the end, nobody's going to come back and say, hey, oh, I remember you grew up in that district, and I remember COVID was really bad, so we're going to give you a pass on these requirements for work or these requirements to go to college. It doesn't happen like that, folks. And so we need to make sure that, again, we're balancing these needs. And so, as Eduardo said, the reason I would like our teachers to be phasing in is because they need to work together. They need to problem solve. They need to figure out, okay, We have a group of children that we want to bring in person. How do we do that while still providing support for other children remotely? How do we make sure that the rigor is there? Oh, we see these children are struggling. What's our strategy to help those children? And of course, we have many children that have many needs that go beyond academics. So how do we make sure, whether it's special ed therapy, other services that are very essential, how do we make sure we do that? Well, again, if we have a strong team working at the school and they're giving us feedback on procedures and safety guidelines, that's what's going to make our schools safe. So that as we allow more children in, we are being responsible to both our staff and our children.
For the parents who are watching out there, can each of you just outline how virtual learning will be different this fall versus what everybody was thrown into in March? And I'll just say, for those who are watching, my daughter, she just started first grade, just year-round school, and what we've seen is it's markedly different. And frankly, I've been super impressed. I'd love to have her in school, but it is much different. So I think it'd be helpful for parents to hear from you all. What will this be like? Because it won't be what we saw in March, right? So I guess we'll just start with Dr. Woods and then go to Dr. Hernandez and then to Pedro.
Sure. So happy to answer that. And I think, Josh, you're absolutely right. I think what part of the messaging we've been trying to send is that this will be markedly different than what people experienced in March, April, and May. The expectations on the student side as well as on the staff side will be not only different, but quite a bit higher. We actually rolled out to our board last night a sample elementary, middle, and high school schedule for virtual learning. And it will involve synchronous real-time check-ins at parts of the day so that students are checking in with their teachers. They have the opportunity to interact with other students all through the day as the subject goes along. So to take your first grade daughter, she would check in at the start of the day for a class meeting, and the teacher would outline these are the goals for the day. This is what we're going to accomplish. Let's check in with each other. Let's visit with each other and make sure that we're touching on some of the social and emotional needs of our kids. Then we would go and start the day. We would have our reading lesson where we've got some direct instruction going, and that would go for however long the teacher feels is necessary. And then kids would go to asynchronous learning where the teacher would have an opportunity to pull a reading group, either of advanced kids that need to be pushed or struggling readers that need to work more in a small group or one-on-one with a teacher. And that kind of cadence would happen all through the day for math, for science and social studies. Kids would have a designated recess and lunchtime. They would still be provided physical education lessons as well as STEM and discovery time. And so this notion of it being different than it was in the spring really can't be oversaid.
So I think the other part of the parents are going to see a change in is that we have taken a lot of the feedback that they've given us in terms of how do you help us as parents also support the work that you're building for us at home. And for us, it was something basic as, can you tell me what a daily schedule looks like for me at home? If I'm going to be a remote support parent, what things do I need to have in my home, from just setting up something like a quiet space, a table? What material does my kid need? You guys have provided us the technology and the connectivity, but now what do I need to have in the home? And so I'll use a high school example, since Brian talked about an elementary. So in our high schools, really looking at, so a lot of our kids are signed up for industry certs. And so what possibilities do we have in creating a schedule so the students can come back to a building, maybe to a building that has less kids in it, to perform the hourly requirements that they have for things like cosmetology, or if it's automotive tech, or whatever CTE work that students are doing, or if they're an early college, high school student. How do we stand up opportunities for students to come back into our buildings and fulfill their requirements? And so that's going to be a model of being synchronous with the teacher, and then maybe a couple of hours off where you're working on a project, you're coming back in, checking back in with your teacher at a designated time, and using that through our LMS system or our platform. And so it's a lot more intentional on the academic side, but it's also, I'm not going to speak for the other gentleman, for myself, is being very clear with teachers that if you're going to be a remote learning teacher, here are some expectations of you as well, in terms of we expect certain things at the end of the day, the week, that would be deliverables for us. So there's a lot more intentionality And then of course, and I hear this from the kids because I got to speak to a lot of our kids, is when do I get to see my friends? That's a big deal. We're talking about a lot of adult issues. The kids right now want to know, I don't get to see my friends anymore. I heard that a lot from my upper elementary kids, the middle and the high school kids. I am stuck at home and I'm not getting that support. And so that's also, this is going to create an opportunity to be intentional with giving them that space. And then of course, on the social emotional side, I'm going to keep preaching this because it's very important to me, particularly the counseling pieces and making sure that our lessons, our platforms are there for students to access, and also working with our families so we can engage in conversations about what is going on and what is happening in the world right now. A lot of our parents don't know how to have those conversations. I come from a home where if we didn't talk about it, it didn't happen. A lot of the kids that are growing up in Edgewood are very reflective of my personal background. So I know I have to be very intentional, because if we don't, to add to what Pedro said earlier, this is something that will forever mark the journey of our kids. And I take that extremely personal. Beyond an exam, beyond a benchmark, it's the emotional scarring that we're going to leave on our kids. So the intentionality of these discussions, and also because I know there's teachers listening, I also want to say the intentional conversation of how do we support our teachers emotionally. We are asking teachers to do a lot. And every teacher I know that I've met is full heart into this work. I'm not upset at them because they're scared right now. They're scared, and I acknowledge that. We'll go back to our purpose. We'll work through the fear. We can get through this. We can manage this if we're allowed to do it within the confines of our particular district. So I know I said a lot, but this is very important to me.
You know, and I couldn't agree more with Eduardo and Dr. Woods. You know, we actually are developing schedules now. There's going to be mandatory synchronous time for every grade level. Of course, it'll be less for the younger children with pre-K and kindergarten, but it's going to be a lot more than what was required during spring break. There'll be several check-ins. It will be a full day. It will be a full day. And while children are doing asynchronous work, teachers are planning. They're literally planning on a regular basis because they're problem solving. They're re-looking at how children are being engaged and whether we need to bring in small intervention groups, whether that's virtually or eventually in person after Labor Day. And so it's going to be a full day. And so we're going to be very, very specific on requirements. And so that's why, you know, for many of our teachers, I predict it's going to be a lot easier for them to work from our buildings because they're going to have solutions for childcare. They're going to have to have solutions of how they problem solve to serve children. And what I learned during the spring break is many of our teachers, they wanted to interact with our children. I saw our teachers doing car parades and they wanted to be visible with our children. And of course, you know, it wasn't safe at that time and still not safe right now. But one of the things we're also doing just from some lessons we learned is, first of all, like I said, we're going to monitor which children are not engaged, and we're going to be in contact with parents, in contact with those children. We are also going to be providing a lot of training for our parents. Right now, one of the ideas that I also am looking to steal is from Cleveland, Cleveland School District. They're doing during their first month a parent orientation and student orientation because they're going to be virtual for at least 4 weeks. We're trying to see if we can do that and even do it a little bit earlier. But what I would like is for every family to be able to come into the building and say, okay, let's make sure your computer's working well. Let's make sure that you understand all of our applications because we have some amazing digital software. But again, it doesn't do us any good if you're struggling to even be able to get on or you're struggling to support your child or your child is struggling. So we like to be able to bring in our families one-on-one, sort of like a different way of meet the teacher. I want to make sure that my kids who are moving up grades or up a level, they get to know who their teachers are because the relationship component is so important and I do not want to lose that. And so for us, you know, again, we're preparing for ensuring that again, we learn from the lessons, but really what it really is having a strong start with our children, identifying their needs, and then getting ready to slowly bringing them in person. And so that has to be in our mind that I do not see a scenario where we're going to be 100% virtual. You know, at least I should say this, if we are, then this country is really in trouble. And it's going to be much bigger than any of the issues we're talking about today. I'm an optimist. So I feel that what's going to happen is we're going to get control of this virus. We have to be able to address the fears that our community has. And we cannot let fear, you know, have these permanent ramifications on our children. And so for us, we're going to prepare to be safe, but again, to gradually bring in children in person and to be able to, again, to make sure their academic needs are addressed. because that is, as Zora said, that is our mission. That is what we're here to do.
I would like to ask a question about, well, I have so many questions and it's so hard to choose, but kind of going off of what Pedro was just saying about when these kids come in, can you talk about what that will look like? Because, you know, we saw the CDC guidelines when they came out, and TEA's guidelines were a little bit different. And parents were like, how are you going to keep masks on kids all day long? How are you going to keep them separated from one another? I also just want to know, like, is every single desk going to have a shield? Are the bathrooms going to have shields in between sinks? I want to know all of that, but as much as we can in this time, what are your buildings going to look like when these kids come back in?
So let me just start a little bit on this real quickly. We will actually have every one of our classrooms set up in the first 3 weeks. The desks will be marked so that when we go, for example, to level 2, allowing 25% of our children to come in, there are specific desks that are already marked where children would be able to sit. They're all going to be at least 6 feet apart, minimum. We're going to have, in some of our classrooms, we have tables that are only 5 feet in distance. So we're actually buying shields so that you can have 2 children at that table if we need to. But again, there's a transparent shield in between. One of the things that we have done is we have bought over 16,000 face masks. And these are face shields, I should say. These are really cute little hats with a shield. They're different colors for every grade level. Every pre-K to second grader will have one of those face shields so that parents don't have to worry about, oh, my child's not going to be able to keep their mask on. So, and one of the reasons why, again, we want to phase in teachers is we have a 50-page document that has all of our procedures as well as our academic plans. We want to make sure that our staff are trained well in that. I'm just a believer that you have to practice routines, and the more you practice, the better you're going to be at it. And then the more that our staff practice those routines, then they're going to be ready for children to come in person. And then we want families during the first 3 weeks. Again, we want to be able to do an orientation. We'll have them come in. Have them come in and see what we're doing. Have them actually give us feedback and say, hey, I think, you know, I like this, but maybe you could, you know, think about this, right? Especially for our younger children, because our older children generally, you know, we saw this during the spring, they tend to do better. They tend to do better remote. By the way, the other flexibility we have with the state, and I want our parents to know this, is for the high schools, they will allow us to have an AB schedule, an every other day schedule. That might be the approach we use even as we bring in children in person, because again, it just creates more safety for us. It allows us to have smaller number of students in the classrooms, but during this first 3 weeks of while we're doing remote, every building will be set up and marked so that families can actually see what the procedures are going to be in place in our district. But everybody will be required to wear a mask. Social distancing will be in place, washing hands on a routine basis. There are some really specific things. I heard Dr. Fauci this morning. If you do those specific things, that is the way you're going to defeat this virus. All those procedures are going to be in place in our district.
Yeah, I think I would answer the question in a similar way, but you know, with regard to, you know, plexiglass installations and PPE requirements and all of that. But the other thing I want to point out is this goes back to that conversation that we started with regard to having the flexibility to control the numbers of people in our buildings and tying it to actual metrics that doctors are monitoring and sharing with us, and in a very transparent way, so that everybody in the community understands here are the metrics that exist today, and because of that, we're operating in this mode. And that to me is the only way to be able to promise to staff and to parents social distancing will be in place, right? Because our ability to monitor students keeping a face shield or a mask on will very much depend on how many students are allowed in the building on a given day. And our ability, again, tied to a metric, tied to the progression of virus spread in our community, is going to be essential to that. So I want to reiterate the notion of tying school reopening to a arbitrary timeline, week 4, week 5, week 8, whatever, week 18, is foolish. That's having hope as your strategy rather than an actual plan. And that's what we've got to get past in our state, because as you've heard this morning, we have plans. We can do this. We can make it work, and we think we can be successful. We can balance those two things we've talked about, health and education. But we've got to have the flexibility from the state in order to do it well.
Well, both gentlemen have really articulated both those areas. So I agree with Brian. We are exercising a lot of the same things that Pedro mentioned with regards to, we're videoing everything from getting off your car to what entrance you walk into. We've broken every building down by building into hallways. So you're practically going to live in a particular hallway if you come to our school. And we're going to have a limited number of kids in a room. You're going to have seats separated. We also want to be very appropriate with developmental ages. Pre-K through second learns a lot from the facial gestures. I mean, we're watching each other on this conversation for the facial gestures we make. Well, little kids need that, because when I read and I get excited, I learn how to read. And so those are also things that we're considering in terms of face shields for lower age kids and those teachers, in terms of, we're going to try to get you from your specific door when you walk into your classroom. You may be wearing a mask when you get in, and you may get a face shield as soon as you come in, because those can be disinfected and cleaned every evening in preparation for the next day. So we're also trying to layer our approach so that if we have some level of contamination in the school, we can break that down to, if it's in a particular classroom, then it's just that classroom. If it was in a restroom, we shut down that restroom. And so all that layering is happening now. We're using a lot of videoing, town hall, inviting parents on the town hall to say, is there something that we're explaining our processes, and if they see a hole, then we work on that. And so that's a lot of what we're working on right now. And really just back to the communication piece. There is just not enough time in the day for us to keep talking to as many people who will listen to us, so that we can get our message out. And that's what we're focusing on right now.
I have a question, and I want to reiterate my thanks to the three of you for being here and for your passion and your dedication. As you get closer to week 9, say this is week 7, and things haven't gotten any better, and the metrics are still bad, what do you do? Does a lot of this depend upon your communication with the parents over these next few weeks, letting them know this doesn't look good and you don't want to be here? But if it comes to week 7, week 8, what are you going to do faced with the stark choice, as Dr. Woods put it?
I wouldn't want to get out in front of my board, but long before we got to that point, and if the metrics were not looking any better, and if the state refused to change their guidance, we would be seeking injunctive relief, or I would be recommending to our board that we seek injunctive relief. It's simply unacceptable to put schools in the position of choosing between the health of students and staff and the risk of a complete loss of funding. And I think we would have a compelling case in that sense.
I will say, having talked to my board about their personal feelings and taking into consideration what the community has said, I would echo where Brian is now. The board is carefully watching the overall metrics in Bexar County. In Edgewood, we think of Edgewood as its own little city inside of the city of San Antonio. And so our board is also believing we will do what's right to keep the safety and security of our of our students, of our staff. And so as we get closer, if that's what it comes down to, then I would be recommending a very similar thing to my board.
Yeah, in our district, we're not going to allow children to come in if it's not safe. I have 2 children myself, both in the district. They both have respiratory issues. My daughter has been in the hospital twice because of those conditions. And I'll tell you, to be a parent and to watch your child with tubes coming out of her, a 6-year-old or a 5-year-old, that completely humbles you. And so for me, if we get into that 9th week and cases are just not going down, I will be working every minute I can to work with parents and say, it's just not safe. Please keep your child at home. And again, if we can bring in small groups that are just significantly at risk of my parents that are homeless, just these very, very terrible conditions at home, we can try to keep in very small groups. But to be able to honor everybody that comes in, for us, we don't think it would be irresponsible of us. And so whatever that looks like, again, I also don't want to get ahead of my board, but we would take the necessary actions because, again, I am not going to put children or staff in a risk that I know myself as a professional is not right, and we're not going to do that.
I want to be really respectful of your time. We've used an hour. It feels like it's been 3 minutes. You guys have been amazing. I've got a little bit of a long-winded question. I feel like we need to have you back just to talk about the athletics piece to this. We've talked a lot about kind of the social and emotional element of learning, and I couldn't agree more. Athletics is a huge part of that, especially as we get into middle school and high school. And I think it would be irresponsible if we dove into that and then told you only have 2 minutes to answer. The question that I have for you guys, and I think you both, all three of you, done a really nice job kind of talking about the extreme right and the extreme left and trying to not make this political. And it sounds like to my ear that you need more support from the middle that isn't being as vocal. I guess I would ask all three of you, we're going to do our very best to distribute this as broadly as we can, because it's just such a critical piece of work that you guys are undertaking. What do you want from the middle? Like, what do you need the most? We've talked about homelessness, food insecurity, childhood abuse. There are so many things that educations provide as a halo to protect our children, not just teach them, but to protect them. What do you need?
I think I can say it pretty briefly. We need advocacy from reasonable people to local and state leaders that we would be allowed two things: flexibility in how we operate tied to science, and secondly, the assurance of stable funding so that we can stand up, Mark, all these things you've talked about, the social emotional supports, the food insecurity solutions, making sure students have access to social workers and doctors and counselors and all of the things that they need while operating in a pandemic. And so to add funding insecurity and the lack of flexibility on top of those things makes our ability to operate in a highly effective manner much more challenging. And so to the degree folks could step back, look at the larger picture and think to themselves, what can I do to help public schools be successful in our community? I would urge advocacy for those two key items.
Pedro, Eduardo, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I definitely agree and put an exclamation point on what Dr. Woods just said. The other thing I would ask is patience from both our staff and our community and our parents. And I want to assure you, and I have a lot of confidence in all of our school leaders, we know how to do this work. We can balance safety and education. We can balance the needs of health and education, but we need to have that flexibility. And what we don't want to do is be caught up on either side of these political fights, because those individuals have different agendas already. And so what I ask our parents is ignore this political, don't get caught up in either side. Because it doesn't help our children. It doesn't help our community. So just stay with us, be patient with us, know that we're gonna be providing you as much information as you need. But that's the main thing, is just to breathe a little bit, be calm, and just stay with us, and don't get caught up on either side of these political fights.
I think we're asking is, give us the space to lead, give us the space to really continue to advocate for children. I mean, what you see here are three men who have committed their life's work to helping communities out. From wherever our backgrounds are or whatever communities we serve, there are still communities who are proud communities, who are governed by local bodies, who were part of that school system, who go places, and as simple as sitting in a cafe and telling people about how proud they are of their district. Don't take that away from them. Don't threaten us with funding issues. Don't scare people either, because it just adds to the confusion. And I'm gonna say what Pedro said, it is my kids who are still sitting out there and they get shortchanged. That's where my problem is. I know what it's like to be somewhere you don't have. And when the system that supports you is gone, then what's left for our kids? So give us the space to lead. This is very personal to us. It's that simple. We can get this done, but give us that space and allow us to work with our governing bodies. That's why they're there. Let us use facts. Let us make decisions that we know will support our kids in the classroom. And I'm going to say it over and over, emotionally, to make sure that they have their basic needs before we even try to meet them academically. I say that to you as an educator, as a parent myself. This is important work. That's why we've dedicated our lives to this. So we need that space for flexibility and support and be part of the process. That's what I think we need from the middle.
We've hit our hour. Obviously, I mean, I have a list of 20 questions here that I didn't even ask. I'm sure every person on this call does, and probably every viewer does as well. But I want to thank all three of you for joining us today and talking about this such an important topic. And appreciate all of your insight and work. So thank you for being here.
We'd love to have you guys back at some point, maybe after the first month of the school year. We'd love to have you back and kind of check in. I can't thank you enough for taking an hour out of your day to spend it with us.
Absolutely.
Thank you for having us. Thank you for covering this.